Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Cloud Security Alliance UK chapter's Identity in the Cloud series. We're welcoming back Paul Simmons for our third talk, and this is going to be on identity challenges.
Oh, let me. There we go.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Paul. Yes, just a reminder about the UK chapter of the Cloud Security Alliance. So we're here to champion the Cloud Security Alliance, the overall organisation's mission in the UK. Take those materials and make it appropriate for a UK audience. We do have an active UK membership, and we encourage you to get involved. We do provide platforms for people to do talks through us. We also engaged with a broad set of UK stakeholders. We're here to champion cloud training, education, and cloud security awareness in the UK. We do survey the needs of UK members, so do get in touch. We do hold polls on what you would like to see, and we're trying to deliver programs to meet those needs. And this is an example, this Identity in the Cloud series is an example of that. We're also here to deliver a research program, and you can find out more about that on our website as well, so cloudsecurityalliance.org.uk. So we've been holding a series of 6 lunchtime talks, so this is the third that we're going through today, every Tuesday, 12:30 for half an hour, and you can catch up via our website for any that you've missed. So we've had 2 already. Please catch up with those if you haven't already seen those. But looking forward to today's talk on identity challenges with Paul. And Paul needs no introduction. Hopefully you know him. He's a legend. He's been a long-standing board member of the UK chapter of the Cloud Security Alliance. He's also director of CSA Europe. He's CEO of Global Identity Foundation, and you've had previous CISO roles. So he's amazing. So a lot of knowledge and experience. So we're lucky to have him. Okay, so I'll hand over to Paul.
Fantastic. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Shireen. Okay, without further ado, a quick recap from part 1 and part 2. Hopefully you have been back to the website. If you've missed them, please go and see them and watch these in order. Be really good. But a quick recap from where we got to on part 1 and part 2, if you've been watching over the last couple of weeks. So from part 1, we started looking at what identity is. Yeah, the I am me. Yeah, I am me. I consist of many attributes of my identity. Yeah, they're split. We split them as humans into logical groups. We call them persona. They're facets of my overall identity. And we do that for a number of reasons, not least of all privacy. So where attributes are asserted and issued by an authoritative source, for example, passport, driver's licensing, if I can provide them signed, in other words, driver's license is technically signed, it allows the entity, me, to assert one or more signed attributes. I'm allowed to drive this particular vehicle, etc., etc. By authenticating personas, we can add a level of confidence in those attributes. Again, driver's license authentication generally is via photo on the driver's license. So the policeman who stops me can look at my photo on the driver's license, authenticate me as the owner of that particular credential I am giving him or her, and they can authenticate me. And that gives them a level of confidence in what we call immutability between the entity me and the assertion driver's license, so we can provide a level of confidence that actually this is my driver's license. And what normal humans called identity actually consists of these 3 distinct components. The authentication piece, how do I uniquely prove that I'm the same person you previously met? The sameness, I am me, I am always will be. And then on top of sameness, we actually hang persona and attributes. From 2, we talked about context. Context is key to making good risk-based decisions. It's how humans make risk-based decisions, depending on the context in which attributes are offered, whether that's environmental attributes or whether that's the fact that he identifies himself with a warrant card as being a policeman. It's all about context at the end of the day. If we consume attributes of an entity from an authoritative source, it enables a better risk-based decision to be made. In other words, if he's wearing a police uniform and he's presenting a police warrant card, therefore I'm more likely to believe that he is a genuine policeman. The entitlement process, are they entitled to ask for my driver's license when they stop me? Yeah, drives the process and is fed from the attributes of the entity, and also include environmental attributes like, are they driving a police car, for example? Yeah, taking trusted attributes from multiple authoritative sources, we can add a level of confidence into that whole process. So police car plus policeman in uniform plus warrant card equals, I'm pretty sure they're entitled to ask for my driver's license. You get the idea. And by understanding the level of what we call immutable binding, we can add a level of confidence to the entitlement process. In other words, how well is that attribute connected to the entity that is asserting it? And that's easy when we do things face to face as humans, but it becomes much, much more difficult as we try to do it in the IT world and over the internet. And while all my examples have little to do with IT, if we understand them properly, we can design better and more secure IT systems, hopefully. So just to finish that magic triangle off, we looked at the identity bit. Yeah, the context bit says, yeah, here's how we understand the attributes presented by the entity in context. We then have a set of rules on top that says, here are the rules by which I will permit it, whatever it is, to happen. We're going to bundle in a whole bunch of what we call external or environmental, more contextual information into that whole rules set that we go through, and that ends up with risk. Therefore, it happens, whatever it is, with a known level of risk. And that doesn't matter whether it's, my policeman example or whether it's an IT example. We should be doing exactly the same. The trouble is, we don't. So, on to today's session. Why can't we leverage attributes, persona, context, and risk in computers? So I'm going to offer you today 5 blockers to a better identity ecosystem. So the first one is this one, number 1, fixation on the user, rather than considering all entities as equal. So this is what we typically call identity 1.0, passwords. And if you're old enough to remember back to the 60s, I certainly was not doing computing in the 60s, but if you are old enough and with the days of the mainframe, if you were lucky enough, you got an account on that mainframe, a user account. You were a user. Yeah. And your job, because the mainframe was God with a small g, was proving to the computer that you are actually you. And actually, it's not identity, that is authentication. And by passing authentication led to a flawed binary assumption that you actually are that user. In other words, you knew the password and the username. And we falsely call this user identity, but it's not. It may be authentication or entity authentication, but it's certainly not user identity. So that was fine when we had mainframe computers and generally companies had just the one. We then started expanding it. This actually, I stole off a textbook, the little picture here. And the problem is, to solve the problem of every computer needing to manage a list of users, we compounded this problem that we invented with mainframes by having one computer manage the identities. Yeah, okay, don't believe that word, and pass on that binary assertion they are who they claim. And that leads us to the problem that if our authentication system defines who you are and says, yes, they've passed their password test, then it passes it on to another computer. So, the password system trusts B and B trusts C. Can C trust A? And the answer is, well, we don't know, but that's sort of what we implement, isn't it? And in the case when I was CISO at AstraZeneca, we were, like everyone else, using Active Directory. If my rather dodgy password passed on its fifth failed attempt, or its fifth attempt before we locked you out, then AD said, yep, is Paul Simmons, binary 1. The trouble is, it then passed that on to 137,000 other devices on the AstraZeneca network saying, definitely is Paul Simmons, binary 1. And it doesn't take a genius to sort of say, what is wrong with this picture? And if you are going to federate, then we have this thing called an n factorial problem, and generally it starts to break down where n equals 3, and certainly fails miserably beyond that, because it's all about trust, isn't it? Because what we're passing on is binary assertions, is user. So on to number 2. Number 2 is the inability to consume attributes that we don't issue, also known as the locus of control problem. Where does this come from? Well, it comes from the work out of Jericho. Way back in April 2006, we wrote these 11 commandments for deperimeterization, as it was then. But identity management of federation was commandment number 8. And it said authentication, authorization, and accountability must interoperate and exchange outside your locus or area of control. So people and systems must be able to manage permissions of resources and the rights of the users that they, and this is the important bit, do not control. And multiple loci, areas of control, must also be supported. What does that actually mean? Well, this is the problem we're faced with today. Your IT department, our IT department, my IT department, when I worked in IT, when faced with needing to manage thousands of users, assets, and networks, come to the conclusion that the only game in town is to manage them all within systems that we own and control, because they can't make anything else work easily. So this leads to a mindset of, guess what? If you give it all to me, I can make it all work for you. And that's very much, especially if you're in security, as I was. Yeah, security generally are control freaks. And I'm the first to put my hand up to that. My children will certainly tell you that. But in today's real world, you are rarely authoritative for most of the attributes that you have, own, or manage. And there's the problem. And this leads us to what I'm going to say is a vicious IAM cycle, identity access and management. Again, we'll talk about that phrase in a second, because I'm going to argue with you it's wrong. But the computer-centric approach leads to needing a central IAM system, because that's where those control freaks are going to put all that information. And what happens is you go, yeah, I have all my information in a single managed IAM system. Therefore, my access control systems, my PDP, policy decision point, and policy enforcement point, only link to my IAM system. Therefore, all people requiring access, irrespective of whether they're staff or the cleaner or the outsourced whatever who's manning your gates or whatever, therefore, all people requiring access must be in my IAM system, because it's the only way my access control system will work. Therefore, all my systems must talk to my IAM system and my PDP system. Therefore, I have a single IAM system, and we go round the vicious cycle time and time again. And it leads to this way of thinking. And we end up, everyone, look at any major corporate system out there, especially where there's a lot of legacy. That is what they run. It's all in-house. We can only make it work when everything is in my IAM system. And IT's dirty little secret is we end up creating probably more dummy staff accounts on our IAM system than we actually have full-time staff on payroll. And we wonder why the bad guys exploit it so easily. So, number 3, we create a binary trust ecosystem. We constantly, throughout the entire ecosystem, turn a maybe Paul Simmons, or maybe this system, or maybe it's our PC that's trying to connect, into an is device with no kind of maybes anywhere else. And this is typically what we call identity 2. So what we do is we adapt or kludge that flawed computer-centric IAM vicious cycle into third parties, clouds, and other environments. Why? Because the business need us to. We're using cloud. We're the Cloud Security Alliance. Yeah, we're using cloud. We're doing joint ventures. We're doing outsource this, that, and the other. We're doing software as a service. We're doing, you name it. We are operating outside in our environment. So what do? We take this big roll of gaffer tape and we attempt to do something with it. Would help if I went the right way. So we do this thing called single sign-on, except single sign-on is a lie. Anyone who tells you they do single sign-on is by definition lying to you. At best, it's reduced sign-on. We do SAML, we do OAuth, we do SCIM, we do UMA, we do all sorts of other fancy protocols to try and make this thing happen. We need to provision all identities that actually need to do this access. Guess what? On our IAM system, because that is what's going to issue those magic protocols out there. We federate identities, and federation, as we said earlier, becomes the, if A trusts B and B trusts C, does A trust C? And the answer is we haven't got a clue. But we federate identities. And we buy into someone else's identity management system, such as Google, Facebook, Microsoft, or whatever. I did come across a Turkish bank that was using a Facebook ID to actually authenticate their customers. Never sure about that one at all. And the problem is, with all of these systems, they are predicated on the fact that it's a binary authentication. In other words, you are issued with a token or a federated identity, or you're buying into someone else's system that Facebook says they are who they claim to be because it's passed our authentication. Trust us. And that leads into all sorts of nightmares because it's a binary one. You have no idea how well they pass that authentication. The system that is offering you the token or the assurance that they are who they say they are, it's a binary one. You have you very rarely, almost never, have insight into how that decision was arrived at. And ultimately, this is what we end up with. And again, you wonder why the bad guys do such a good job of hacking us and getting into our systems. So what's wrong with identity 1 and 2? Well, this is, most corporate systems look like it. We start with a user, a person, an entity. It may be that entity. You authenticate to Active Directory or an AAA server or a secure ID. So secure ID is even worse than Active Directory because guess what? If you've authenticated on secure ID, it's the gold standard, or was anyway. Therefore, we trust that more. Why? No idea. Out of those systems come an is person, a binary, and that then is passed to all those other applications, file servers, cloud services, third-party services as, yep, this definitely, we trust us. We tell you it's this person. So here's the problem. Identity defined once by IT is divorced from business requirements. It only authenticates generally a person, not entities. And actually, an entity can pass authentication. That's all we're talking about. It's not authenticating a person. It's just saying, has that entity passed the authentication challenge we gave them? It doesn't actually say it is that person. There's little, if no, contextual information that is passed in that transaction. There's no understanding of risk. especially in a business context. And there's no understanding actually of, well, did they fail the password? Is it a weak password? And did they only get it right on the 5th attempt? Because that should vary your risk depending on whether it's a long and complex password and they got it right first time. But none of that is fed into that equation. And it only really works with a single locus of control. In other words, one that we, the IT department in that organization, own. And most user information, if used or held on that Active Directory server, actually is not authoritative. Very little. If you're actually putting in extra information to support some kind of context, then forget it. It's not authoritative. So number 4 in our 5 blockers to a better identity ecosystem is an inability to share attributes with other entities. So I hope everyone, if you're looking at, if anyone's doing an identity presentation, it's de rigueur that you actually share this cartoon. An identity presentation wouldn't be complete without it. On the internet, everyone knows a dog. The interesting thing is that this is actually, do the math, 30 years old. And it's as true today as it ever was. What's the problem with this? What's the root cause problem that actually this cartoon is at the heart of? It's this. We need to understand the level of what we call immutable linkage. How well is the wetware connected to the firmware? We need to understand the level of immutable linkage to the entity that is claiming this is the login. So in other words, we need to know that actually this isn't a person. This is actually a dog at the end of the line. And ultimately, again, probably no identity presentation, certainly no zero trust presentation is incomplete without this quote. It's misquoted by Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. I'm told by the Russians, Russian friends, that actually it doesn't quite mean that, but it's close. And the problem is trust quickly fails because it's down to who owns the root of an identity. Yeah, and we've seen them. Do you trust Sabre, the airline booking system, or Amadeus? Do you trust Facebook, Google, Apple, or X these days at the root of an identity? Because if you don't trust the root of an identity, you can't trust the identity itself. Identity clubs, and there are some good ones around. And again, if you go to an identity presentation, you'll find a lot of people quoting Bank ID, which is the Scandinavian bank ID system, or the Swedish bank ID system, I should say. And the problem is that there aren't that many Swedish banks because there aren't that many Swedes out there in comparison to other countries. And therefore, they can make it work as a club of a few banks within Sweden, especially if the government signs off on it. But of course, you go to Norway and the Norwegians have bank ID, except it's the Norwegian bank ID system because they don't quite trust the Swedish bank ID system because the Swedish government's at the root of it. So even among the Scandinavians, they can't make it interoperate that well. And if you do interoperate, it's on the basis of, trust me, we say it's this person. TSCP, which is the Mill in the Aerospace Bridge, again, very expensive. Again, it's trust us. We have identity proofed this person to this standard. Trust us, binary 1. Federation fails. We've talked about federation failing as it expands. It doesn't expand beyond n equals 3. You can't make it work. And binary trust, the biggest problem with the binary trust when it comes to certainly financial stuff is the liability problem. If Bank A says, trust me, this is Paul Simmons, and it turns out not to be, and they've asserted that it is Paul Simmons, then who's liable for that stolen money? Is it Paul Simmons? Is it the bank that actually asserted it definitely was me? Is it the bank that actually lost the money? Don't know. But binary trust has a major liability problem attached to it. And the problem is this: when trust fails, we simply go back to doing the identity proofing ourselves time and time again. So if you go into a bank to do KYC checks, guess what? The fact that I've got 3 accounts with Barclays, all of which have KYC attached to them, means nothing to Halifax, who want me to start from scratch with my passport, my driver's license, my utility bill, etc., etc. So finally, the inability to understand stuff in context. And this is explained quite nicely by explaining that we as IT people design solutions to solve our problems. So, let's look at grand identity failures. UK identity card scheme. 4.5 billion people. If you're a British taxpayer, 4.5 billion pounds it cost you and me with a failed UK identity card scheme. Why? Because it was designed to identify people. And then HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, said, yeah, but we have agents. We have companies who actually do tax on behalf, and we have companies out there. So we have entities that are entity company, we have entity agent, and all your system deals with is entity people. It's not fit for purpose. Yeah. Sorry, I should say. Yeah, that's the original UK identity card scheme. Then we had UK Verify, which was the HMRC debacle. All the commercial partners got their fingers well and truly burnt. No one's admitting how much that one cost us, but the central costs are estimated to be 154 million. The US government, NSTIC, National Strategy on Trusted Identity in Cyberspace. Only the Americans could come up with that one. $20 million in seed money, basically completely wasted. The Kenyan Hyundai project, 74 million. Basically, any attempt of governments to be at the core of control of their citizens, possible exception of China. Our other solution is, well, guess what? We design ever more complex solution. This little picture came out of NSTIC, the work that was done in American. But yeah, everything, Stalk, how we share EU identities. Again, we have a binary problem at the heart of that, and lots of expensive consultants, of course. So the two, questions you should be asking yourself is, does my solution remove other methods or just add yet another? And the answer is, in most cases, guess what? It just adds yet another. And the other question you should be asking yourselves is, why is your backstop always passwords? Because no one has successfully managed to remove the need for passwords at the root. So in conclusion, the questions you need to answer, if you're the requesting entity, in other words, the person requesting those attributes, yeah, can you make it so that the US accept a Chinese ID and vice versa? Can you walk into a refugee camp and get an identifier? Can I create personas with a high enough level of immutability that actually I can do border entry with it? Can the core of my identity, the I am me bit that we talked about in session 1, be 100% anonymous? Can attributes I assert still be signed and truly authoritative? In other words, can I assert I'm a UK citizen, or can I assert that this is my date of birth, or actually I am over 18? Can I do complex contextual assertions? In other words, I need to prove for tax purposes I'm a dual citizen, or I pay tax in a foreign country, or I have agency, whether it's power of attorney, or I'm an accountant, or I'm a parent or a guardian, because that is what we need to do over the internet. And ultimately, are all my assertions privacy enhancing? And this one's really important. We haven't covered this today, but are all my biometrics and my identity assertions secure under my exclusive control? As the relying party, the person who receives these, can they have full visibility over the transaction chain? Can I make receiving that assertion that you are you? Can I make my own risk calculation, or do I have to trust someone else's? Will the system work offline? Because as a first world country, we make this mistake time and time again. How do we make it work offline, online, and direct entity to entity? Can I use the persona relationships for secure communications? Because that would be really nice. Then I could do real secure email. Can I use this relationship to prove who I am? Remembering trust must be bidirectional. And can I understand organizational entities as well as people? So when your bank rings you and you say, yeah, but can you prove you're my bank? And they go, oh, no one's ever asked me that before. Yeah. So, and am I able to leverage those trusted attributes for KYC? So actually, if I need to go into the Halifax, I can leverage my trusted attributes without the need to start from scratch. So I'm going to finish up just by saying we need to start by using the correct terms. You need to adjust your thinking. So we use lots of multiple incorrect terms which reinforce the wrong way of doing things. Users, user identity, identity itself, human entities versus non-human entities. We have to thank the Americans for that one. That comes out of NIST because, again, their starting point was human entities and computer systems. And someone said to them, well, yeah, but there are lots of other entities in this. So we'll call them human entities and non-human entities. Just call them entities. Don't worry about it. IAM. Yeah, it is not IAM. Policy decision point tends to reinforce a single one. Central authentication service, the word is in there. Central, again, one for your organization. Why? User management. Do you need a user management process? You should be actually getting those attributes from the authoritative source, not trying to manage them yourself. Employer identity management, IDPs, identity providers. Why? Because again, it's a binary and there's lots of horrendous things on liability in there. And finally, federated identity. Well, we talked enough about that. Here's what you should be using. Entities, authentication, sameness, personas, attributes and assertions, signed attributes, context, levels of immutable linkage, levels of confidence. Yeah, risk, in other words. Entitlement, separating the I and AM, so it's identity, entitlement and access management, and consuming attributes we don't own. And I'm going to add two more in there just to finish off with privacy and anonymity, which is a totally different talk. Maybe we'll do that as the CSA UK chapter at some point. I'm going to leave you with this as a thought. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It's attributed to Albert Einstein. Whether he actually said it, who knows, but it's a great quote. If you want to know where to go on some of the principles for what we call Identity 3.0, which is, internet capable, proper identity, here's where to go. There's the link. And with that is me done. Sorry, 2 minutes over. Just to say that coming up in a week's time, we have Sean, who's going to talk about how we extend identity into the cloud, particularly looking at some of the patterns we typically use to extend our identity in the cloud. But more importantly, the pros and the cons of each one, because that's actually what you need to know, certainly as a cloud and identity architect. And with that, Shireen, we're done.
Brilliant, Paul. That was amazing. Thank you so much. Join us next week, 12:30, talk number 4. Thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate it. Thanks again, Paul.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.